Welcome to the top 10 video games of 1984 as chosen by me. If you'd like to tell me some of your favourite video games of 1984, please leave them in the comments. Okay, without further ado, let's get on with the countdown. Number 10, Raid Over Moscow, Commodore 64. Raid Over Moscow was developed by Access Software and published by US Gold. Released during the Cold War era, Raid Over Moscow is an action game in which the player has to stop 3 Soviet nuclear attacks on North America, then fight his way into and destroy a nuclear facility in Moscow. The game opens with an alert that a nuclear missile has been launched from Soviet City towards North America. The game begins in a hangar where the American space planes are stored. The player has to safely fly the craft out one at a time. They then have to fly through the defense perimeter around the launch site missile silo, dodging obstacles, heat-seeking missiles and Soviet tanks and planes. If successful, the player proceeds to the missile silos. These must be destroyed whilst avoiding Soviet planes trying to shoot down the player. The Soviet Defense Center, looking remarkably like the Kremlin, and a reactor room with killer robots provide the backdrop for the final 2 stages. The game was made famous in Finland when a member of the Finnish parliament questioned whether it was acceptable to sell a game that might cause anger in the Soviet Union, with which relations were carefully managed. As a result of the public debate, the game was the top-selling Commodore 64 game in Finland from March to September 1985, according to computer magazine Mikrobiti. Number 9, DALEY THOMPSON'S Decathlon ZX Spectrum. Ocean Software, best known for its movie tie-ins, picked up the rights to the track and field format from Konami and teamed up with Thompson in a bid to capitalise on his gold medal success at the Olympic Games in 1980 and 1984, and thus DALEY THOMPSON'S Decathlon was born. The Spectrum version was the first game to use Speed Lock, a fast loader on the computer. Players took part in the 10 events of the modern day decathlon over the course of 2 days. The first day consisted of 100 metres, long jump, shot put, high jump and 400 metres. While 110 hurdles, pole vault, discus, javelin and 1500 metres made up day 2. Most events were a matter of hammering 2 keys, representing the left and right leg, or waggling the joystick frantically to build up speed. Depressing the fire button for a set time would raise the throwing or jumping angle for some events. The game rapidly gained a reputation amongst players as a joystick killer because of the constant vigorous waggling of the joystick required during many of the events. Players were given 3 lives and failure to qualify in each event saw one of them deducted. Sadly, there was no medal podium sequence after the final event. The game simply restarted from the beginning of day 1, but with tougher qualification targets. Equally disappointing was the lack of any multiplayer support. Surely its inclusion could have helped the game garner an even bigger following. The game was well received in the press. The Spectrum edition received particular acclaim, winning Crash Magazine's Game of the Year award in 1984 and picking up the gong for Best Arcade Style Game at the Golden Joysticks. DALEY THOMPSON'S Decathlon was the best-selling Spectrum game in the final quarter of 1984. Its popularity convinced Ocean to reissue it the following year as part of the They Sold a Million compilation, which also included Beachhead, SABRE WULF and Jet Set Willy. Number 8, Raid on Bungling Bay, Commodore 64. Raid on Bungling Bay was the first video game designed by Will Wright. It was published by Broderbund. The game would inspire Wright to develop SimCity. The player controls a helicopter launched from an aircraft carrier. The aim is to bomb 6 factories scattered across islands on a small planetoid occupied by the Bungling Empire, frequent villains in Broderbund games. Failure means that the Bungling Empire develops a war machine to take over the planet Earth. Players have to attack its infrastructure while defending the aircraft carrier which serves as a home base. Over time, the factories grow and develop new technologies to use against the player. There are also visible signs of dependency among the islands, such as supply boats moving between them. In order to win the game, the player must prevent the escalation by bombing all the factories as quickly as possible, keeping them from advancing their technology. If left alone for too long, the factories create enough new weaponry to overwhelm the player. Compute wrote in 1985 that Raid on Bungling Bay possesses all the virtues needed to appease the demanding gamer with amazingly detailed graphics. In 1996, Computer Gaming World declared Raid on Bungling Bay the 24th best computer game ever released. Wright continued to develop the editor for the game as a personal toy because he enjoyed it so much. He researched urban planning and realised that others might enjoy constructing and building cities themselves. The result was a more advanced simulation that eventually became SimCity. Number 7. Matchday ZX Spectrum. Matchday is a football computer game published by Ocean Software. It was originally on the ZX Spectrum and then later released on Amstrad CPC, BBC Micro and Commodore 64 systems. It's the first game in the Matchday series, and the title and opening music are references to Match of the Day. It was the creation of programmer John Rittman. Matchday had 8 teams that the player could choose, such as Rittman Rovers, Clark PR and Ocean United. Players could rename the teams and redefine the team colours. The game uses modified sprites from a previous Rittman title, Bear Bother, to create an almost isometric but still ultimately side-on football title. In addition to providing Rittman with any equipment and support he needed, Ocean Software was busy acquiring a license for the game. It ended up with just the theme tune to BBC's Match of the Day. The name was altered to the snappier Matchday, and the game was squeezed out just in time for Christmas 1984, receiving rave reviews in practically every computer games magazine. The game was included on the 1986 compilation They Sold a Million Too, along with Bruce Lee, Match Point and Night Law. The sequel, Matchday 2, was much the same but incorporated 2 features still used today in modern football titles: a deflection system, the ball could bounce off players which meant headers were possible, and a shot power system including back heels. The game is also similar to a previously unpublished game by John Rittman called Soccerama. In 1995, John Rittman tried to release Matchday 3, but due to copyright problems he had to change the name of the game to Super Match Soccer. Number 6. School Days ZX Spectrum. School Days was released by Microsphere and was written by David Reedy with graphics designed by Keith Warrington. School Days features the player as a schoolboy named Eric with the objective of stealing his report card out of the staff room safe by accomplishing various tasks around the school. The computer controls all other characters in the game, including the headmaster, other teachers and other pupils. The 4 teachers are Mr. Wacker, the headmaster, Mr. Rocket, the science teacher, Mr. Withit, the geography teacher, and Mr. Creek, the history master. Other than Eric, 3 of the pupils are named: Boy Wonder, the tearaway, Angelface, the bully, and Einstein, the swat. The player has the option of renaming the characters before the game begins. If Eric is caught out of class or otherwise misbehaving, teacher characters pursue him and issue him with lines. When 10,000 lines or more are accumulated, the game ends with Eric's expulsion. Eric can also receive lines for things that are not his fault, such as lying or sitting on the floor when in fact he's been knocked down, or being nearest a teacher who has just been hit by the projectile fired by another pupil. So part of the challenge of the game is to prevent other pupils from getting Eric into trouble. School Days was a commercial success when first released, selling 50,000 copies despite very little marketing or promotion. The ZX Spectrum version was voted the 4th best game of all time in a special issue of Your Sinclair magazine in 2004. The game has been recognised as being a pioneer of the sandbox game format later used by Little Computer People and The Sims. The game was followed by Back to School, which expanded the gameplay to include a neighbouring girls' school and a love interest, with the benefit of being able to reduce one's lines, along with stink bombs, mice, water pistols, frogs, sherry and a long-suffering caretaker. Number 5. Ghostbusters, Commodore 64. Ghostbusters is a licensed game by Activision based on the movie of the same name. It was designed by David Crane and released for several home computer platforms in 1984. After the film Ghostbusters had been launched, Columbia Pictures approached Activision International and offered the license to the game rights to Activision, stipulating it was to be finished as quickly as possible in order to be released while the movie was at peak popularity. As a result, Activision was forced to complete the programming work in only 6 weeks, in contrast to their usual 9 months of development time for a game. Activision had at the time a rough concept for a driving/maze game to be called Car Wars, and it was decided to build the Ghostbusters game from it. The player sets up a ghostbusting franchise in New York City with a rising PK energy level and has the ability to purchase equipment such as traps or upgrade their vehicle. The player then negotiates a grid representing the city. When the player moves to a city block that is flashing red, the game mode switches to an overhead view of the player's vehicle driving to the location. The player must move left and right to vacuum up the stray ghosts and avoid cars. They need to stop the roamers from reaching the Temple of Zool, which causes the PK energy level to jump. The player then moves to a screen in which a Slimer ghost must be guided with 2 proton streams over a ghost trap. If the ghost is successfully captured, the player's income increases. Developer David Crane decided it was important to add digitised speech to the game. Some of the trendiest things to come from the movie were the soundbites such as "He Slimed Me" and the crowd chanting "Ghostbusters," Crane said. The aim is to have $10,000 by the time the city's PK level reaches 9999. Surprisingly, the primary aim is not to rescue the city but to make profit, i.e. to have more than $10,000 capital at the end of the game with a new account. Even when the town is taken over by demons, it doesn't matter. If the account contains enough at the end of the game, you can play the finale. After the first successful game, the player is given an account number which stores the amount of money the player had at the end of the game. This allowed for purchasing more expensive items for use, faster cars, more traps, etc. Number 4. Summer Games, Commodore 64. Summer Games is a sports video game developed by Epix and released by US Gold, based on sports featured in the Summer Olympic Games. It was ported to the Apple II, Atari 2600, Atari 7800, Atari 8-bit family and Sega Master System. Amiga, ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC and Atari ST versions were also created for inclusion in compilations. Summer Games was the first in Epic's Games series, which included Summer Games 2, Winter Games, World Games, California Games 2, the Games Summer Edition and the Games Winter Edition. It's presented as a virtual multi-sport competition called the Epix Games. There was no official Olympic licensing in place, with up to 8 players choosing a country to represent, then taking turns competing in various events to try for a medal. A scoring system was used in the game. Gold medals equal 5 points, silver medals equal 3, and bronze medals equal 1 point. On most versions, world records could be saved to floppy disk. The Commodore 64 version allows players to link Summer Games and Summer Games 2 to engage in one large Olympic competition, accumulating medals in a tournament from both games. The events include pole vault, platform diving, 4x400 meters relay, 100 meter dash, gymnastics, freestyle relay swimming, 100 meters freestyle swimming and skeet shooting. The winner of each event would receive their gold medal and the national anthem of the country they choose to represent plays. The game allows players to compete in all of the events sequentially, choose a few events, choose one event or practice one event. In 1996, Next Generation listed the Games series collectively as number 89 on its top 100 games of all time. The magazine stated that though the games had great graphics for their time, their most defining qualities were their competitive multiplayer modes and the level of control that has yet to be equalled. Number 3. Jet Set Willy ZX Spectrum. Jet Set Willy is a platform video game originally written by Matthew Smith for the ZX Spectrum home computer. The game is a sequel to Manic Miner, published in 1983, and the second game in the Miner Willy series. A tired Miner Willy has to tidy up all the items left around his house after a huge party. With this done, his housekeeper Maria will let him go to bed. Willy's mansion was bought with the wealth obtained from his adventures in Manic Miner, but much of it remains unexplored and it appears to be full of strange creatures. Willy must explore the enormous mansion and its grounds, including a beach and a yacht, to fully tidy up the house so he can get some much needed sleep. Willy is controlled using only left, right and jump. He can climb stairs by walking into them, jumping through them to avoid them, and climb swinging ropes by pushing left or right depending on what direction the rope is swinging. Jet Set Willy is a sort of open world platform game in which the player moves from room to room in the mansion. The play area itself consists of 60 playable screens making up the mansion and its grounds, and contains hazards, static killer objects, guardians, killer monsters which move along predetermined paths, various platforms and collectible objects. The collectible items glow to distinguish them from other objects in the room. Reviewing Jet Set Willy for Your Spectrum magazine in 1984, Sue Denham wrote that the game was every bit as good and refreshing as the original. The game was number 1 in the UK Spectrum chart for several months until it was replaced by SABRE. In the final issue of Your Sinclair, the ZX Spectrum version was ranked number 32 on the top 100 games of all time and voted number 33 on the Reader's top 100 games of all time. In 2004, the ZX Spectrum version was voted the 6th best game of all time by Retro Gamer readers in an article originally intended for a special issue of Your Sinclair bundled with Retro Gamer. Number 2. Bruce Lee, Commodore 64. Bruce Lee was designed by Ron J. Fortier with graphics by Kelly Day and music by John A. Fitzpatrick. It was originally developed for the Atari 8-bit family and published in 1984 by Datasoft, along with ports for the Apple II and Commodore 64. Bruce Lee is a platform/fighting game hybrid. The plot involves the eponymous martial artist advancing from chamber to chamber in a wizard's tower, seeking to claim infinite wealth and the secret of immortality. There are 20 chambers, each represented by a single screen with platforms and ladders. To progress, the player must collect a number of lanterns suspended from various points in the chamber. Most chambers are guarded by 2 mobile enemies, the ninja, who attacks with a bokken stick, and the green Yarmo, a large unarmed warrior visually styled as a sumo wrestler. On platforms with sufficient graphic support, the Yarmo skin is actually pictured as green, though in the cover art he has a natural human skin tone. A multiplayer mode allows second player to control Yarmo or to allow 2 players to alternately control Bruce. The ninja and Yarmo are also vulnerable to the screen's dangers but have infinite lives, so they always return. Whereas Yarmo is consistently identified as a single person, one version of the manual implies that each reappearance of the ninja is a new individual, replacing the previous one. Later chambers include more hazards such as mines and moving walls, as well as a comb-like surface that has an electric spark racing along it. Skillful walking, climbing, ducking and jumping are all required to negotiate them. On the 20th screen, Lee finally faces the evil Fire Wizard. 2 unofficial sequels have both been released in recent years, Bruce Lee 2 in 2015 and Bruce Lee Return of Fury in 2019. Before we look at the number 1 game, here are a few honourable mentions that didn't quite make the top 10.
Another visitor. Stay a while. Stay forever.
Number 1. Impossible Mission, Commodore 64. Impossible Mission was written for the Commodore 64 by Dennis Caswell and published by Epix. The player takes the role of a secret agent who must stop an evil genius, Professor Alvin Atombender, who is believed to be tampering with national security computers. The player races against the clock to reassemble and decrypt passwords to Atombender's control room while avoiding deadly robots. Password pieces are found by searching furniture in the rooms. Additionally, the puzzle pieces are randomised in every game. A completed puzzle forms a 9-letter password which lets the player reach Professor Atombender. When searching, the player can also reset all movable platforms and freeze enemy robots for a limited time, providing he finds the passwords. Impossible Mission features 2 types of enemies. The first are the robots. These have a cylindrical main body, their bodies are electrified and some are able to use a short-range death ray. Some are stationary, others move in patterns, and others specifically hunt the player. The second enemy is a hovering electrified ball. Most of these chase the player. You have 6 hours of game time to collect 36 puzzle pieces. Every time the player dies, 10 minutes are deducted from the total time. Caswell cites Rogue as his inspiration for the randomised room layouts and the electronic game Simon as his inspiration for the musical checkerboard puzzle. The hovering balls were inspired by the Rover security guard from the Prisoner TV series. The game's title was one of the last elements to be finished. According to Caswell, the choice of name was delayed as long as possible and Impossible Mission was more resorted to than chosen. In 1985, Zap64 editors ranked Impossible Mission second in their list of the best Commodore 64 games, while readers ranked it first with 26% of votes. Compute listed the game in May 1988 as one of our favourite games, writing that the sound effects of the character committing suicide was one of their guilty pleasures. The ZX Spectrum version was voted the 28th best game of all time in a special issue of Your Sinclair magazine in 2004. The sequel, Impossible Mission 2, followed in 1988. It further complicated the quest with new traps and items. Elvin's stronghold also grew in size, divided into a number of towers which the player had to traverse, all while picking up pieces of the password. In 1994, Impossible Mission 2025 was released for the Amiga. It kept the same idea as the previous games and mainly featured updated graphics and audio, also allowing the player to choose among 3 different characters. I hope you enjoyed my top 10 games of 1984. Thank you for watching and see you in 1985.